Welcome, American Studies students, to this year's first video lecture recorded by Mr. King. Today is September the 14th, 2015, and we're going to begin really our course of study of history this year, looking at, as you can see, the Great Transformation of the United States, 1877 to 1900. So after our initial analysis of the two film clips that we saw and trying to determine something about America using the clues that we saw, we're now going to sort of pivot and go back into history and to see what we can really find and discover. And I think what's always really important and valuable is trying to establish links between today's world, what we see, experience, live today, and the past, recognizing that sometimes that's very difficult, sometimes that's tedious, sometimes it's not all that interesting. There are certain time periods that attract our attention more naturally. We're humans, and that's okay. So this may be one of those time periods that may grab your attention. I hope what it does, and what I hope to be able to do for you, is to develop some of the ideas, some of the themes from this time period, and then you'll be able to see how in many ways they are still present. In fact, in many ways they've come back. We're having similar discussions today about the same and or similar topics. So that being said, by way of introduction, we'll get started. What I would ask you to do as you listen is to take some notes. Some of you can do this on a computer, some might do it on an iPad, and some of you might like to do it the old-fashioned way, handwriting your notes. But those notes will be useful and valuable to you for class discussions, any kind of prompts, essays, any kind of quizzes that we might be taking typically have been open note, so that will be a good way for you to have information at your fingertips. So, the Great Transformation, 1877 to 1900, and what we're really going to look at, if I can zoom in here, nope, zoomed the wrong way, is at this thing called the Gilded Age. I think that's probably better. So what you see up there are several images, and I like to use those images as sort of a reminder, as an anchor. So you see a farm, you see a factory, you see immigrants in the lower left, and then you see a picture of New York City around 1900. And what I think this does is sort of traces the changes that occurred in the late 1800s in the farming field and agriculture, in industry, in immigration that changed our country, who we are. If you look at last names, probably in our own classroom, you can find a wide range of ethnic backgrounds. That is the result of the immigration. And immigrants really came here looking for the opportunities, and the jobs were available in these new large factories. As you can see, it's a pretty large factory. And then people began to flock to cities and live in these newer, taller buildings. You see the first skyscrapers. So that's what we're going to look at. So let me just mention this, that we're talking about change and transformation, and we often think about change as being associated with progress, moving forward, making improvements, solving long-term problems in order to achieve or live a better life. So what I want to do is kind of go back to the Preamble of the Constitution, which might seem strange because that was, after all, 1787, not 1877. But I think some of the words in the Preamble, and it's very short, will be useful for us both now and throughout the year. So I'm going to quote from the Preamble to the Constitution, and it starts saying, and I quote, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution." So what do we have? Why did I want to read the Preamble of the Constitution? Well, I think because it really captures the ideals of who we, and that pronoun does appear, are as Americans. We find terms such as the common good, but we also find individuals' presence in terms of the blessings of liberty. So we're talking about, we live in a country where we want to protect the common good for all people, the we, but we also want to protect the blessings of liberty for the individuals. And I think that's one of the great starting points with the Constitution, is the common good versus the individual. And I think that this time period, the Gilded Age, in particular 1877 to 1900, really focuses on the individual quite a great deal. The individual person, the individual company, the individual business, the individual corporation. You get the picture. It's all about sort of the individual and the individual coming, if you will, to America or working in America to achieve the blessings of the liberty that people had here. So I think that's a really good place to start. And at times, I think we're going to find outright conflict between the common good, the we, and the I, and our own individual liberties. So I think that's an interesting point and place to start. And what we want to do is try to, with each age, with each time period we examine, we want to see whether, in fact, it's more about the common good or it's more about the individual. And I think you'll see that as each time period, there's a different answer to that question. There's a different focus, a different emphasis, and a lot of it has to do with the history of the time. So understanding history, studying history, learning some history can maybe better help us understand what's going on and give us a better sense of who we are and where we are now, where we were and where we are. So with that being said, if there are any questions, feel free to bring those up in class. So we're going to start with the idea that the change in the Gilded Age also led to what historians would call the apex of American industrial might. That is, the United States quickly grows to become the greatest industrial power in the world, and the nation then with the greatest amount of wealth in the world. And that's a position that really the United States has not lost yet, though there are certainly other nations, China in particular, that may be challenging the United States. It is quite clear that the United States still occupies that #1 position in terms of the biggest economy in the world and the most amount of wealth. So, and that really is a product of the transformations in this time period that we're studying right now. So, with that being said, I'd also like to offer that the great growth in our economy transformed the United States. It led to the cities, as I mentioned earlier. It led to new waves of immigration. It led to remarkable advances in technology. Technology is something that surrounds us. It makes our lives easier. It entertains us. It distracts us. Whatever it is, but technology is certainly present in our lives, and it's always evolving at a faster and faster pace. Well, that was true of the 1877 to 1900 period. Some of the new things that came out of that era were light bulbs, elevators, refrigerated rail cars, the telephone. We're going to have mass print newspapers. So things that we really kind of take for granted today, at the time, were really cutting edge developments that changed the way people live. So in addition to this idea of great progress, great wealth, we also find, however, that the period of 1877 to 1900 was a troubled time as well. It was a time of low wages. It was a time of poverty. It was a time of racism, overt racism towards African Americans, towards Native Americans. It was a time of sexism. Women certainly struggled to obtain basic rights such as voting. They could not vote legally until 1920. So we're talking about sexism. Nativism, there was a real outcry and backlash against immigrants. We're talking about crowded cities, dirty cities, unhealthy cities, lots of crime. And one of the greatest things, I think, is this was a time of great economic inequality, something we hear a lot about today if we're tuned into the news. And in fact, 10% of the American people own 70% of the nation's combined wealth. That is staggering inequality. And it really then brings up the question of the American dream. And is the American dream real? Is it accessible to people? And I would add this question: is the sort of American dream of fairness and equality for all, is that dream, fairness and equality for all, compatible with capitalism? That is, does capitalism, by definition, by its own nature, produce winners and losers? And that's just that. And if you are a winner, good for you. If, on the other hand, you're a loser, too bad. That's just a product of this system we call capitalism. So there's some bigger questions. And again, the question I want to reiterate is this idea of the American dream, that is equality, and sort of in a democratic sense, that is all people can hope to be equal, live an equal life. Is it compatible with capitalism? And that's a really big question. So that being said, I think at this point I'll stop this video lecture and let you guys jot down any questions you have. But we're next going to look into what I consider to be the greatest change in this time period, and I think that's the capitalist revolution. And in order to really talk about that, we need to then, I think, understand what capitalism is and what it isn't, and then understand what happened in the time period 1877 to 1900. So that's what we'll pick up in our next video lecture, this idea of the capitalist revolution. And by the way, the capitalist revolution swept not only industry, but it swept agriculture, it swept mining. All areas of our economy were sort of revolutionized in this time period, 1877 to 1900. So we're going to call it the Great Capitalist Revolution, that did in fact produce the Gilded Age. And if you've been wondering about gilded, it just simply means covered in gold. So there was this idea, and I'll talk more about it later, that everything was covered in gold. Of course, that wasn't true. That's sort of a myth. But the idea has sort of persisted in time. So with that, I'll end this first video lecture. You let me know how it was. If I'm speaking too quickly, certainly, at least you don't have to see me. You can hear me. Hopefully you got some notes, and maybe you have some questions. Thanks.